My husband put a $60,000 business loan in my name without telling me. He said it was for us. I didn't say a word. And then I did the one thing he never saw coming. I found out on a Tuesday. Not because he told me, because I was sitting at our kitchen table trying to refinance my car, and the credit union rep paused mid sentence and said, "Miss Harmon, I'm seeing some significant activity on your report. Are you aware of a business loan originated 18 months ago under your social security number?" I said, "I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?" She repeated it. $60,000. A business loan. 18 months ago. My name, my social security number, my credit. I had no idea it existed. I kept my voice even. I thanked her. I told her I'd call back. Then I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time, staring at the car keys I'd been about to hand over, thinking about the fact that my husband of 4 years had taken out a loan in my name, and at no point in 18 months had he mentioned it. Not once. His truck was in the driveway. He was in the garage, like always. The garage had become his entire universe for the past 2 years, the place where he was building something, where the dream lived, where I was not supposed to ask too many questions because I didn't understand entrepreneurific. I had heard that word so many times, entrepreneurship, like it was a shield. I walked to the door that connected the kitchen to the garage and opened it. He was at the workbench, headphones on, back to me. "Hey," I said. He pulled one ear off. "What's up? Can you come inside for a second?" Something in my voice must have landed differently than usual because he actually turned around, looked at my face. Then he took off the headphones completely. "You okay? Come inside," I said again. "Please." He followed me to the kitchen table. I sat down. He stayed standing, which told me something. Standing is what you do when you want the option to leave. I told him what the credit union rep had said, word for word as best I could remember it. $60,000. My social security number. 18 months ago. He didn't flinch. That was the part that broke something loose in my chest. He didn't look confused. He didn't say, "What are you talking about?" He just exhaled slowly through his nose and pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "I was going to tell you," he said. I looked at him. "I needed collateral to get the loan approved. My credit was too damaged from the first LLC. You know that. But yours was perfect, and the business was doing well at the time. I really thought you used my social security number," I said. "Without asking me. I knew you'd say no." He said it so simply. Like that explained it. Like that made it okay. He knew I'd say no, so he just didn't ask. He went around me. He used my identity and my credit and my name and my future, and he did it because he was afraid I'd say no. "The business," I said slowly. "The one that's been in a rough patch for the last 6 months?" He looked at the table. That rough patch. That was what he'd called it every time I asked why money felt tighter, why we'd pulled back from savings, why the vacation fund had gone quiet. A rough patch? I believed him because I wanted to. Because he'd always had ideas that eventually paid off, and because I told myself that trusting your spouse means not interrogating every line item. But it wasn't a rough patch. It was $60,000 of debt in my name, going sideways. "How much is left?" I asked. Long pause. "How much is left of the 60,000?" I said again, flat. "In the account? For the business." "We've had expenses," he started. "How much?" "About 11,000. $49,000. Gone in 18 months. On a business I hadn't even known I was funding. I stood up. Not because I had somewhere to go, just because I couldn't stay sitting. "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it, which scared me a little. I wasn't angry. I was something colder than that. "I need to make some calls." "Harlow," he said. "That's my name." The way he said it was the way you say a name when you're trying to slow someone down. "Can we just talk first? I have a plan. There's still time to turn this around." You should have talked to me 18 months ago," I said, "before you signed my name to anything." I went to the bedroom and closed the door. Not slammed, closed. My hands were shaking by the time I sat on the edge of the bed, but my head was surprisingly clear. Clear in the way that happens when the fog you didn't even know you were living in suddenly lifts all at once. I had questions, good ones. The kind that come not from panic but from a brain that has just been handed a problem it is determined to solve. First, was what he did legal? I pulled up my laptop and started searching. Loan fraud, identity fraud, spousal financial fraud. The results were complicated in the way that most legal things are when marriage is involved. Jurisdiction matters, intent matters, whether you later ratified the debt matters. But the clearest answer I found was this. Using someone's social security number to take out a loan without their knowledge or consent is fraud. The fact that we were married didn't change that. It muddied it, made it harder, but it didn't erase it. Second, what was actually on my credit report? I pulled all three bureaus. The loan was there, all of it, clear as a stamp. Originated 18 months ago. Current, for now. But the account was flagged with missed payments going back 4 months. 4 months of missed payments I hadn't known existed. I sat there scrolling through entries on my credit report the way you read a document someone left out on the counter by accident. This was my financial life. These numbers determined whether I could rent an apartment, finance a car, qualify for a mortgage someday. And someone else had been making decisions about it without telling me. Third, who could I call? I wasn't ready to call a lawyer. Not yet. But I knew I needed information before I had another conversation with my husband because I'd learned something sitting at that kitchen table. He had a plan. He always had a plan. And his plans had a way of becoming my problems. I texted my oldest friend, the one who'd been a paralegal for 11 years and had heard every version of every family crisis. I said, I need to talk to you tonight. Something happened. It's bad. She called me in 4 minutes. I told her everything. She didn't gasp or react dramatically. That's one of the things I love about her. She just listens and then she thinks and then she tells you what she actually knows instead of what sounds helpful. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. First thing, don't touch the account, don't pay anything toward that loan. Don't acknowledge it as yours to any creditor yet because the moment you make a payment, you're ratifying the debt. I hadn't even thought of that. Second, she continued, get documentation of everything. The loan origination date, the payment history, everything you can access without tipping him off that you're building a file, do it tonight. And third, I asked, talk to a consumer financial attorney. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet, a financial attorney who handles fraud and identity theft. Because whether you stay married or not, this debt is going to follow you unless someone with actual credentials tells the credit bureau what happened. I was writing everything down. Are you okay? She asked. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I'm not panicking. That feels important. It is important, she said. Panic is how they keep you from thinking. She didn't mean my husband specifically. She meant the situation, the thing that had been designed, maybe not deliberately, to overwhelm me into compliance. I knew I could wait until morning to do most of this, but I also knew I wasn't going to sleep, so I spent the next 2 hours doing exactly what she said. I found the loan documents. They were in a folder in his email that I still had access to, because we'd never kept secrets before this, apparently, except for the enormous ones. I screenshotted every page. The origination date, the terms, the payment history, my name printed neatly in the signatory field. Except. I looked at that signature line for a long time. It wasn't my handwriting. We'd been together for 6 years. I knew his handwriting and I knew mine. The signature on that loan document was a version of my name that was close. Close enough to pass at a bank with a notary who'd never met me. But it wasn't how I signed my name. The loop on the H was wrong. The way it crossed over itself at the end. My husband hadn't just taken out a loan in my name. He had forged my signature. I set the laptop down on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling for a minute. Then I opened my phone and texted my friend again. He signed my name. It's not my signature. Her reply came back in under a minute. That's fraud. Full stop. No gray area. Document that line specifically. I did. He knocked on the bedroom door around 10. I said I needed space to think. He went quiet, and then I heard him go back to the garage. By 11, I had a folder on my desktop with 17 screenshots and a 3-page document I'd typed out, time stamped, laying out everything I knew and when I'd learned it. It wasn't a legal brief, but it was a record. And I had learned enough in the past several hours to know that records mattered. I didn't sleep much. But when morning came, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like someone who had found solid ground and was very carefully figuring out how large it was. This is where I stopped waiting for him to explain himself and started figuring out exactly what had been done. You know what he did? You know I have the documents. What you don't know yet is what happens when I stop being the person who keeps the peace and start being the person who asks the right questions in the right rooms. Stay close. The attorney's office smelled like old coffee and new carpet. Her name was on the door in gold letters, and she'd been in consumer financial law for 16 years. And when I walked in with my folder of screenshots and my 3-page document, she looked at it for about 4 minutes and then looked at me and said, "You did this last night." "Yes," I said. "Good instincts," she said, which felt like more than a compliment. It felt like permission to trust myself. She walked me through what I was actually dealing with. The loan, taken out under my social security number without my consent, was textbook identity fraud. The forged signature elevated it. In our state, that was a felony. The fact that we were married complicated the question of whether I'd pursue criminal charges, but it did not change what had legally occurred. "What are my options?" I asked. She laid them out without drama, the way someone does when they've explained this kind of thing 100 times and understands that what you need is clarity, not emotion. Option 1. I could dispute the loan as fraudulent with the credit bureau and the lender. I would need to file an identity theft report, which would create a paper trail. The lender would investigate. If the investigation supported my claim, and given the signature discrepancy, she thought it likely would, the loan could be removed from my credit report. Option 2. I could pursue civil action against my husband for the damage to my credit and any financial harm I'd suffered. Option 3. I could pursue criminal charges for the forgery. She was clear that this was a separate track from the civil and credit options and that it was entirely my decision. She wasn't recommending it or discouraging it, just naming it. "What about the marriage?" I asked. It was the first time I'd said it out loud in that framing. She put her pen down. "That's not my area," she said gently. "But everything I've just described is available to you regardless of what you decide about the marriage. Your financial rights don't depend on that decision." That mattered to me. I needed to know that my options didn't narrow based on which direction I chose to go personally. I asked her what she'd need from me to start the dispute process. She told me I had almost everything already. The one thing I needed was an official identity theft report, which I could file online with the FTC in about 15 minutes. I filed it in the parking lot before I drove home. When I got back to the house, my husband was in the kitchen. He'd made coffee, which is what he did when he was trying. He poured me a cup without asking, which is something I'd always loved about him. He knew how I took it without having to ask. That's the thing about loving someone for years. The small accommodations calcify into something that looks like care. Sometimes it is care. Sometimes it's muscle memory, masquerading as love. I hadn't decided yet which this was. "I went to see an attorney," I said. "I didn't sit down. He set his mug on the counter." "Okay." She confirmed that what you did constitutes identity fraud. The forged signature is a felony in this state. His face didn't go the color I expected. He didn't collapse or defend himself. He looked tired, older than he'd looked yesterday. "I know," he said. I stared at him. "You know." "I've known for a long time that what I did was wrong." He said it to the floor. "I kept telling myself I'd pay it off before you ever found out. That by the time it came up, it would be fixed." "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like you made a decision about what I could handle," I said. And then you made another decision on top of that, and another, and at no point did you think I had the right to know what was being done in my name. He nodded, slowly, like the weight of it was just now hitting the right places. I'm not going to make a decision today, I said, about any of it, about the fraud report, about the marriage, about anything. I need time. That's fair, he said. It's not about fair, I told him. It's about me not making permanent decisions from temporary panic. The attorney had actually said that. I'd written it down. He looked up. What do you need from me right now? It was the right question. Finally, about 4 years too late, and about 18 months too late, and about one forged signature too late, but still, it was the right question. I need you to pull together every document related to that loan, I said. Every statement, every payment made, every account it touched. I need to understand exactly what's out there in my name. He did it. That afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table and printed everything, organized it by date, and handed me a stack of papers without a single argument. It was the most honest thing he'd done in 2 years. You've seen what he did and what I found. You've seen the attorney's office and the FTC report and the conversation that didn't go the way either of us expected. But you haven't seen what happens in the weeks after, when the dispute process starts moving, when the lender calls, when the investigation closes, when I have to decide what I'm rebuilding and what I'm walking away from. That part is where things really shift. Don't go anywhere. The FTC report set things in motion faster than I expected. Within 10 days of filing, I received a letter from the lender's fraud department requesting additional documentation. I sent everything, the screenshots, the comparison of signatures, the timeline I'd written out. My attorney helped me phrase the accompanying letter so that it was factual and specific and left no interpretive room. The lender put the account in dispute status. That meant no new negative marks while the investigation was ongoing. It also meant the collections calls that had started trickling in. Calls to my cell phone for a debt I hadn't known existed stopped. I told my husband what I was doing, not asking permission, just informing him the way he should have informed me. He didn't fight it. That told me something. Either he'd fully accepted the consequences, or he'd done the math and realized that fighting me was the only thing that would definitely make this worse for him. Meanwhile, I was living in the middle of a marriage that had become a construction zone. Every conversation felt load bearing. We were civil with each other, careful, maybe overly careful, in the way of people who know they're one misread sentence away from a collapse. He'd picked up extra work through a contractor he knew. He was trying to make payments on the loan from his own income, separate from mine. I'd opened a new account at a different bank and started moving my direct deposit there. Some people would say that was the moment the marriage was over. Maybe. Or maybe it was just the moment I stopped making myself financially legible to someone who'd shown me they would use that against me. My friend came over one evening with wine and dinner she'd made at home and carried over in containers because that's the kind of person she is. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first heard the credit union rep pause, and she asked me how I was actually doing. I don't know what I'm grieving, I said. The marriage, or the version of him I thought I married, or just the idea that I was safe. Probably all three, she said. She was right. Grief isn't organized. It doesn't come one thing at a time. What I kept coming back to in the quiet hours was this. I had been a good partner. I had worked, contributed, trusted, deferred when I thought deferring was the loving thing to do. I had not interrogated every business decision because I'd believed that trust meant space, and that trust had been used. Not in a moment of desperation, or maybe it had been, but desperation isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. And those are not the same thing. The investigation concluded 6 weeks after I'd filed the report. The lender's fraud team found sufficient evidence that the loan had been originated without my knowledge or consent. The signature discrepancy was central to their finding. The account was flagged as fraudulent origination and removed from my credit profile. All associated negative marks, the 4 months of late payments I'd never known about, were deleted. My credit score came back. Not perfectly, There was still collateral damage from the inquiry and from a few other things that had got entangled in the mess. But the $60,000 was gone from my report. My name was clear. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Target after getting the letter, and I cried for about 10 minutes. Not because I was sad, because I had spent 6 weeks living under a number I hadn't chosen, and now it was lifted and my body needed somewhere to put that. Then I dried my face and went inside and bought dish soap and a new shower curtain because life continues whether or not you've just resolved a major fraud case, and I was out of dish soap. My husband and I separated 2 months later. It wasn't a single conversation. It was a series of smaller ones, each one a little more honest than the last, until one evening he said, "I don't think you trust me anymore." And I said, "I don't," and neither of us tried to argue about whether that was fair. He moved into a short-term rental. We divided things without lawyers initially, though I kept mine on retainer just in case. The business was his. The debt he generated, the loan that was now removed from my credit but still existed somewhere in the financial universe, was his to resolve. My attorney had made sure that was clearly documented. He's paying it down. I know this because he told me, not because I'm tracking it. We talk occasionally. Not warmly exactly, but without cruelty. He told me once that losing me was the consequence he'd always told himself he could outrun. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. The thing I think about most, now that some time has passed, is how long I'd been living next to something I couldn't see. 18 months. That loan had existed for 18 months. I had made dinner and argued about where to spend the holidays and laughed at things on television and told him I loved him. And the entire time there was a document with my forged signature sitting in a filing system somewhere, making decisions about my future while I slept. I don't say this to make myself sound naive. I say it because I think a lot of people live next to things they can't see. We call it trust, and sometimes it is. And sometimes trust is just the name we give to the absence of information. What changed for me wasn't finding out. It was what I did after. I didn't yell. I didn't collapse. I didn't sign anything, agree to anything, absorb anything that wasn't mine. I asked for documentation, found an attorney, filed the report, opened the new account. I made my world legible to myself instead of waiting for someone else to explain it to me. My credit score is higher now than it was before any of this happened. I know that sounds almost darkly funny. The fraud that was supposed to bury me ended up making me read every single line of my financial life for the first time. And when you do that, when you actually look, you find things you can fix. I have a different car now, one I financed entirely on my own. The interest rate was good. The credit union rep who approved it didn't pause once. I've thought about what I tell someone in my position, someone sitting at a kitchen table holding car keys, hearing a stranger on the phone tell them something is wrong with their credit report, something they didn't know was there. Check your credit reports, all three bureaus, not just when something feels off, regularly, the way you check anything else that matters. Because information is not the enemy, ignorance is what leaves you open. And if you find something that isn't yours, something you didn't sign, didn't authorize, didn't choose, you are allowed to dispute it. You are allowed to make calls. You are allowed to walk into an attorney's office with a folder of screenshots and ask what your options are. You are not required to absorb someone else's decisions just because they made them in your name. The person who signed that loan document believed I would be too afraid, too loyal, or too confused to push back. They were wrong about all three. And the most honest revenge I can name is this: I'm still here, I'm still standing. And every number associated with my financial life is something I chose. If you've been carrying something that was never yours, something put there without your permission, dressed up as love or family or partnership, I want you to hear this. You don't have to keep it. You have the right to set it down. And once you do, you might be surprised how far you can go without it. I used to think trust was something you gave and then left alone. Like planting something in the ground and walking away. You don't stand over it every day demanding to see the roots. You just believe it's growing the way it's supposed to. That belief cost me $60,000. or almost did. What I've come to understand, sitting on the other side of all of it, is that what happened to me wasn't random bad luck. It was the result of a very specific set of choices, his and mine. His were deliberate. Mine were made out of a kind of willful softness that I used to call love and now call something more complicated than that. He chose to use my name because he knew I would have said no. He chose to forge my signature because saying no was something I was actually capable of. He knew that. He just counted on the fact that I'd never look closely enough to find it. And for 18 months, he was right. That's the part I sit with. Not the fraud, not the forgery. Those are his to carry. What I sit with is the 18 months I spent trusting in the absence of information and calling it a marriage. There's a version of this story where I find out and collapse, where I absorb the debt, negotiate quietly, protect the image of the relationship at the expense of my own financial future. I've known women who did exactly that. Not because they were weak, they weren't, but because they hadn't yet learned that protecting someone who used you is not loyalty. It's just a different kind of loss. What saved me, I think, was that I got angry in a useful direction. Not at him, not at first. At the situation. At the gap between what I'd believed and what was actually true. That anger, clean, specific, productive, is what got me to a laptop at 11 at night, building a file. It's what got me to an attorney's office with 17 screenshots and the 3-page document. It's what got me to a credit report that is now genuinely better than it was before any of this happened. Intelligence without courage is just information. Courage without intelligence is just noise. What I had to learn fast and without warning was how to use both at the same time. How to be scared and still make the next right call. How to love someone and still refuse to carry what wasn't mine. The consequences landed where they belonged. That's not cruelty. That's just what happens when you stop absorbing what isn't yours. He's paying down the debt now, slowly, from a warehouse job and a rental he can barely afford. I'm not glad about his circumstances, but I'm not guilty about them either. He made choices. Choices have weight. That weight has to rest somewhere. And for the first time in our 4 years together, it's resting on the right person. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all, is that knowledge is not the enemy of love. Checking your own credit report is not a betrayal of your partner. Asking questions is not an accusation. The most ethical thing you can do in any relationship is stay informed about your own life, because no one else is obligated to protect it for you. And as I learned, not everyone will.